They put a runway straight through my cornfield while I was out on vacation. I couldn't believe what I was seeing when I got back. Bulldozers ripping apart 4 decades of family crops. Then a woman in high-end clothes climbed out of her BMW, her eyes instantly sizing up my worn work gear like I didn't belong. When I told her this was my land, she shoved a $5,000 invoice into my hands with visible disgust. "People like you should move somewhere more fitting," she sneered. The disrespect stung. This smug HOA president assumed she could buy me off because I looked poor. She had no clue she just picked a fight with someone who actually oversees the skies above her little project. Drop your guess about who I really am. Things are about to get wild. I was driving my rusty pickup down the gravel lane to our Oklahoma farm, expecting 6 quiet months before heading back to Washington, D.C. After 25 years managing the nation's airspace, I wanted silence. Instead, I found bulldozers tearing up my father's 40-year-old cornfield. Orange survey stakes were scattered like someone was doodling on my property. Standing in the wreckage, wearing a spotless designer suit, was a woman who'd soon learn that judging people by appearances could become the costliest mistake of her life. This wasn't a small project. It was a full-scale operation with industrial earth movers reshaping soil that had sustained 3 generations of my family. Dust hung in the air as I parked next to her shiny white BMW. The woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, inspecting the site like a general looking over captured land. One glance at my thrift store clothes and battered truck, as she instantly filed me under caretaker or problem. "You, caretaker," she ordered briskly. "Clear this area now. Important people are arriving." She spoke with the kind of entitled tone that expected obedience without hesitation. Still, I noticed a faint tremor in her hands, a crack in the mask of authority. "I'm James Anderson," I said calmly. "This is my farm." Her expression soured, the kind of look the wealthy reserve for inconveniences. "Oh, the landowner." She thrust a document toward me. "Aviation development contribution, $5,000 due in 14 days. I stared at the paper in disbelief. That was half a year of my supposed pension, according to the humble story I live by. "Premium communities require premium contributions," she said with a smile that felt more like a knife. "Those who can't keep up should relocate to places more appropriate for their lifestyle." It was polite corporate speech, but a threat nonetheless. I scanned a massive site. This scale of development needed federal permits, environmental studies, and airspace approval. We were barely 15 miles from Tulsa International, inside controlled airspace. "Hope someone checked federal airspace regulations," I remarked. She waved it off with a manicured hand. "Professionals handle those things. Don't bother yourself with matters outside your background." The irony was thick. Here she was, illegally building a private airstrip in restricted airspace, lecturing the former deputy director of the FAA. I pulled out my phone, making sure she noticed. "Reynolds Anderson here. Begin a file, Patricia Brown. Unauthorized private airstrip. Large scale. Potential major violations. Response level. Full regulatory enforcement." I watched her carefully. The moment she heard federal violations, her confidence faltered. Patricia's eyes burned with irritation. How dare someone she thought beneath her ignore her? "Government retiree thinks he can scare a successful businesswoman," she muttered, too loud to be private. Her words exposed what she was really hiding. Desperation cloaked in arrogance. I spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "Timeline may need to move up. This calls for federal authority." Her eyes narrowed, trying to figure out how a supposed farmer knew the language of regulators. 3 days later, Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting at the community hall. She gave a slick presentation, charts of rising property values, glossy renderings of her so-called aviation community. She wore another expensive suit, projecting confidence, though I could spot the cracks a mile away after decades of reading negotiators. "We're raising standards," she announced proudly, "bringing in residents who value excellence and can contribute to our community's growth." Elderly neighbors filled the folding chairs, faces showing the years they'd invested here. Margaret Thompson, a 72-year-old retired teacher, rose slowly, her dignity intact despite visible strain. 40 years we've built this neighborhood, she said firmly. You can't just erase people because they're older or living on fixed incomes. She carried the sort of authority earned from confronting unruly teens and wrestling with military red tape. Patricia answered with a corporate chill that could have impressed any Fortune 500 boardroom. Demographics change, Mrs. Thompson. Either adapt to our standards or consider other neighborhoods more suited to your needs. That night Margaret knocked on my door, her face streaked with tears. She clutched a $600 citation for a mailbox violation, the same mailbox that had stood untouched for 15 years. This wasn't random enforcement. It was a targeted campaign to price out residents on fixed incomes who couldn't fight back. I realized Patricia wasn't merely arrogant. She was executing a deliberate plan to force out anyone who didn't fit her premium community model. The cruelty was calculated, organized, and unlawful under federal fair housing rules. At the meeting, I'd watched Patricia closely, cataloging the small tells beneath her polished presentation. Her hands trembled when she spoke about schedules. She grew defensive when questioned about funding. She kept taking furtive calls she clearly didn't want to advertise. Those designer clothes and corporate poise weren't proof of success. They were finance props. Desperation was wearing designer labels. Someone was squeezing her on deadlines, and she was passing that pressure onto neighbors who had no leverage. I decided to pull the environmental thread, a classic misdirection I'd used in federal enforcement. Who verified compliance with the Clean Water Act? I asked during public comment. The EPA treats wetland violations seriously. Patricia's reply was curt and unprepared. Our consultants handle environmental compliance, she said. I pressed a bit more. Projects have been halted for years over smaller infractions. Her composure flickered when my phone rang in plain view. Caller ID showing federal compliance activity. I answered in the clipped tone of someone used to authority. Anderson here. Multiple potential violations documented. No enforcement action yet, still assessing scope. Patricia's mask tightened. The color drained from her bravado. After the call, she cornered me. Federal compliance? What agency did you work for? She asked. I kept my cover intentionally vague. Regulatory paperwork for decades. Boring documentation across several agencies. That was all she needed to hear to feel unsettled. Patricia pushed back with PR. She launched a Sunnydale aviation community page and posted photos of elderly homeowners labeled renovation opportunities. The open hostility was breathtaking. Neighbors retaliated quickly, forming Protect Our Neighbors and swelling membership as folks recognized a pattern of harassment. But Patricia had already made a big tactical mistake. She'd picked a fight with people who'd spent their lives dealing with bureaucracy and had little left to lose. Her timeline leaked too. Calendar invites mistakenly sent to the HOA list showed red flag deadlines. Whoever was squeezing her was in a hurry and ruthless. Who would push someone to gamble with aviation safety and federal law? Have you ever met someone who looked prosperous but was secretly drowning? Tell your story below. My digging into Patricia's finances exposed the depth of the squeeze. Town inquiries showed she'd mortgaged her home for the down payment and borrowed another $200,000 from an aggressive investment firm. She collected $45,000 in community fees from 9 families while leasing designer appearances to keep up illusions. Her lenders demanded an operational private airstrip in 3 months, a deadline that made genuine safety compliance impossible. Panicked, Patricia hired Captain Steve Wilson, a regional aviation consultant, to lend credibility. Within minutes, he called out problems that should have halted construction. This placement violates multiple federal regulations, he told her bluntly. You're within controlled airspace near Tulsa International without required clearances. It's illegal and unsafe. Steve's arrival forced me to play the part of a casual local. When he asked about approach patterns and tower coordination, I gave plain answers that sounded competent enough without revealing too much. Looks level, no big obstacles. Should be fine for small planes, right? He raised an eyebrow, but moved on, reserving judgment. Then my phone buzzed again, this time showing DOT safety on the screen. I escalated, shifting from environmental misdirection to transportation safety pressure. Anderson here. Safety concerns logged. Multiple regulatory gaps identified. Inspection timeline will depend on severity. Patricia pressed for specifics. You did compliance work, right? For what agency? I stayed deliberately broad. Transportation safety intersects many federal offices. There are departments for everything. Margaret pulled me aside after Steve's inspection and spoke with the clipped certainty of someone used to military protocols. I taught on bases for 20 years, she said. I know federal authority when I see it. Her assessment was unervingly on target and dangerously helpful. She looked at me with the seasoned caution of someone who had spent decades handling classified military information. What agency are you really with? She asked quietly. I offered just enough truth to build trust while keeping my cover intact. Let's just say I know federal regulations well enough to recognize when serious violations are unfolding. Some matters require thorough documentation before any action. The county inspector's visit gave me an unexpected test. He fired off questions about drainage systems, foundation specs, and environmental clearances. Without thinking, I replied with detailed knowledge pulled straight from federal standards, far beyond what an average compliance clerk should know. Both Patricia and Steve overheard every word, my technical fluency raising immediate suspicions. Steve's concern was sharper than Patricia's. For a retired paperwork guy, you're remarkably familiar with federal construction standards, he noted. Most clerks don't talk load-bearing requirements with that kind of precision. His comment made clear that my cover story was wearing thin. Meanwhile, the community battle was raging online. Patricia's posts exposed her cruel mindset, describing elderly neighbors as obstacles to progress, dragging down property values. She spoke openly of needing a demographic upgrade. In response, the countergroup documented harassment, tracked her financial motives, and rallied growing support. Screenshots soon reached Channel 7 News, and the story caught fire statewide, with senior advocacy groups joining the fight. Under mounting scrutiny, Patricia's composure began to unravel. Steve's blunt professional report had destroyed her image of legitimacy. Her investors at Premium Development Partners were pressuring her with increasingly harsh calls about deadlines. The media was dragging her tactics into the spotlight, and my subtle hints about regulatory issues had made her realize just how deep the federal risks went. She was cornered by creditors demanding progress and regulations that made progress impossible, a mix that made her volatile and dangerous. The numbers were brutally simple. She had burned through most of her borrowed funds while collecting only $45,000 from residents. Her investors expected a functioning private airstrip, but Steve's assessment ensured federal approval would never come. Financial success required legal impossibility, and that contradiction was tearing her apart. Steve's suspicion of me now posed the greatest threat to my cover. His aviation knowledge gave him the tools to notice the inconsistencies I worked hard to conceal, and his professional code made it inevitable he'd report violations regardless of personal risk. Your federal expertise isn't random, he told me after the inspection. Transportation, safety, compliance, you know the system too well. Most clerks don't speak fluent bureaucracy. His analysis was dangerously close to the truth, forcing me to consider whether maintaining my cover was still viable. If you were James, would you break cover now? Or keep holding until the endgame? Comment what you'd do. Steve's integrity soon outweighed his ties to Patricia. Standing at the half-built runway, surrounded by glaring violations, he delivered his verdict. I cannot certify this airstrip. The safety breaches are extensive, federal law is clear, and if aircraft land here, people will die. I'm into my involvement now and may file directly with the FAA. Patricia's reaction revealed how desperate she had become. You can't leave me now. Premium Development Partners is flying in next week for a live demonstration. The investors' pressure was boiling over. Patricia, once smug and domineering, now looked like a cornered debtor with everything on the line. I listened as she took one threatening call after another, her voice trembling. 3 weeks maximum for full operations, or the investment is reclaimed, with penalties, one caller barked. Patricia's replies carried the ragged tone of someone gambling everything on a collapsing scheme. Her investors wanted planes on the ground. Federal law guaranteed that would never happen. I took one carefully staged call within earshot. Anderson here. Hold pending safety review. Then I hung up. Patricia's panic drove her to confront me directly. Compliance inspection team? What kind of transportation agency sends federal enforcement crews? I kept my answers ambiguous but edged the pressure higher. Different violations require different regulatory responses. Aviation safety isn't optional, it's federal law. Unauthorized operations are never tolerated. Meanwhile, Margaret Thompson had quietly built a counterforce. She had organized a dozen older residents into a structured resistance cell, proving Patricia's second major mistake was underestimating her senior neighbors. Media strategy is ready, Margaret told me in private. My granddaughter works for Channel 7. We were going public the next day with a full file documenting systematic harassment. These older residents had decades of institutional experience and weren't cowed by corporate intimidation. They'd weathered deployments, raised families during lean times, and built this neighborhood from the ground up. Patricia Brown had chosen the wrong people to terrorize. When the county inspector came back, I kept my answers short and procedural, directing him to the stamp plans on record. Steve watched, waiting for me to over-explain. I didn't. My silence made him scrutinize me more than any technical monologue ever could. His suspicion was hardening into certainty. My story didn't add up. Your technical knowledge spans transportation, environmental, construction, and aviation regulations, he said. That isn't typical compliance work. That looks like a senior regulatory authority with cross-agency experience. Social media reached a tipping point, and regional news picked it up. Channel 7's investigative reporter lined up interviews with victims. Videos of Patricia's targeting spread fast. The narrative wrote itself. Wealthy developer exploiting vulnerable seniors for profit. Public sentiment swung hard against her, and state-level aging advocacy groups began mobilizing to back our neighbors. Premium development partners were not gentle lenders. They were relentless in recovering investments and known to push legal boundaries. My digging showed Patricia had mortgaged her house and tapped aggressive financing to fund the project. She'd taken in only $45,000 in community fees while burning through borrowed capital. Her investors demanded a functioning airstrip to justify their money, something federal law made impossible. The contradiction left her trapped, willing to ignore safety and legal restraints to meet impossible deadlines. Patricia's direct accusations made her fear clear. Advanced regulatory knowledge across multiple departments, inspection authority, technical expertise in aviation, environmental, and transportation systems. You're not a retired clerk, she spat. I maintained my cover, but acknowledged her unease. 30 years in federal regulatory work teaches you to spot cross-agency violations, build contacts, and know how enforcement actually unfolds. Her reaction revealed both panic and the kinds of measures she assumed could be used against threats. Steve's aviation background made him the most dangerous witness. He'd worked closely with FAA regulators and could recognize the cadence and terminology of true federal authority. You don't talk like a clerk, he told me bluntly. You speak like someone who's been issuing regulatory decisions for decades. Your language, interagency sense, and enforcement familiarity point to command-level experience. His reading was frighteningly accurate as my cover frayed under Patricia's mounting pressure. The investment timeline forced Patricia toward a public demonstration that would expose her to federal scrutiny. Premium development partners wanted an operational showpiece. Patricia needed public success to placate creditors and residents. She arranged a media event. Investors, county officials, and aircraft operations all slated to prove legitimacy. Ironically, that spectacle would create the perfect moment for federal enforcement to step in. Her stress became visible. She stopped hiding the strain behind designer clothes. Phone calls grew frantic, and conversations with creditors turned hostile. Community members logged every exchange, as evidence, while media attention threatened to uncover financial misconduct. Whether she realized it or not, the federal net was tightening, and the compressed timeline made her more dangerous. Patricia's suspicion was growing. What cover story would you use to throw her off? Drop your best ideas. Her final play was naked desperation masked as confidence. In front of a rushed group of community leaders, county officials, and investor reps, she declared, "This Friday we'll stage a full demonstration of our premium aviation community. County invited, media confirmed. We'll show a fully operational private airstrip and prove our compliance." The coordination was elaborate despite her dwindling resources. Tents, catering, politician appearances, and live coverage to legitimize the scheme by spectacle. My federal coordination calls ratcheted up as the demonstration neared, intended to pressure psychologically, while I kept the exact nature of my authority vague. Operation Prairie Review authorized for Friday, I said within earshot of Patricia. Tulsa ATC briefed on unauthorized airstrip. Illegal operations will be addressed through unified federal response. I deliberately avoided naming any specific agency, keeping the multi-department ambiguity that had protected my cover so far. Patricia's paranoia was obvious as she pressed harder to learn which federal department was closing in on her project. Premium Development Partners' pressure had flipped her situation from financial stress into outright terror about personal fallout. Investor calls had turned openly hostile. Operational demonstration Friday, or we reclaim assets immediately with maximum penalties. I overheard on one heated call. She knew failure wouldn't only mean bankruptcy. It would mean total financial and social ruin, a public scapegoating designed to warn other borrowers away from defaulting. Margaret Thompson's media offensive was timed to inflict the most damage right before Patricia's planned demonstration. Channel 7 is booked for Thursday at prime time. Margaret told me with quiet satisfaction. State-level aging advocates were lining up behind us, and we had a complete record of every harassment incident Patricia had orchestrated. The Elderly Resistance Network had turned her targeting into a political blunder. The wave of sympathy and legal support she had provoked was something no PR campaign could erase. Steve Wilson's conscience finally won out over business ties. He found me near the construction and spoke with the blunt clarity of a man who knew the stakes. That demonstration flight could be catastrophic, he said, his voice steady with professional weight. Rushed construction, safety shortcuts, likely federal violations, and aircraft operations in controlled airspace without clearance were an invitation to tragedy. If an accident happened during the demonstration, lives would be lost, and every decision leading up to it would be investigated. He was right on both legal and safety grounds. I tested Steve's resolve with a simple hypothetical. If you had the authority to stop a potential aviation disaster, what would you do? His answer was immediate. Contact the FAA now, regardless of business fallout. Safety isn't negotiable. Federal authorities must be alerted before anyone gets hurt. His integrity made him exactly the kind of consultant federal enforcement would trust. To nudge Patricia into deeper paranoia without revealing everything, I staged a phone call so she could overhear key phrases. I spoke louder than usual, confirmed. Leadership fully briefed for Friday. Response to match the risk. Enforcement level appropriate to violation severity and public safety. The effect was immediate. Alarm bells rang, but she still couldn't name which agency was on us. Deputy Director of what agency? She demanded. I kept the answer vague. Transportation, environmental, aviation. When public safety is at stake, multiple agencies coordinate. That ambiguity fed her fear and pushed her toward reckless choices. The online backlash had reached a tipping point. National aging advocacy groups and federal fair housing monitors were watching. Viral videos of Patricia's demographic upgrade talk and labeled renovation opportunities were powerful evidence of discriminatory intent. The media narrative was irresistible. A wealthy developer preying on seniors while recklessly endangering public safety. Public opinion had swung decisively against her, creating political pressure that made federal involvement almost inevitable. whether I was personally involved or not. Patricia's final plans exposed the impossible gap between her needs and the law. She was scripting victory speeches about beating bureaucracy, even as federal enforcement quietly assembled a comprehensive case. Investors demanded operational proof, but federal aviation law made such operations impossible without clearances. The contest between her desperate PR spectacle and the legal reality guaranteed that any public demonstration would produce irrefutable evidence of violations and maximize the embarrassment and legal consequences when federal authority intervened. My ethical rationale for letting events unfold was simple. Full accountability requires comprehensive evidence. A premature enforcement action might stop the immediate harm, but could let Patricia dodge broader exposure and allow similar predators to keep preying on other communities, bringing the whole case into the light. Elder harassment, securities fraud, environmental breaches, and aviation safety violations would create a stronger deterrent than a quiet shutdown ever could. The trap had been set by a perfect storm of Patricia's desperation, investor pressure, and escalating public outrage. And now the confrontation was imminent. Community opposition, investor pressure, and federal regulators were converging toward a single moment of public reckoning. Patricia wandered into full federal exposure, convinced that a successful demonstration would erase every problem. Friday would be the showdown. Local corruption versus federal authority, and media coverage would make the outcome a lasting lesson about the cost of preying on vulnerable communities while flouting aviation safety rules. Watching Patricia scramble through her final preparations, I reflected on how every element had lined up. Friday, she'd finally learn exactly which federal aviation authority she'd been mocking, I thought with quiet satisfaction. Her victory remarks were already scripted in corporate prose, a speech about vision defeating petty bureaucracy, but she had no idea the petty bureaucrat she'd scorn was actually the FAA deputy director. When her demonstration fell apart, it would be the most expensive miscalculation of her life. This was it, the end game. What do you think will happen when she learns the truth? Predict the chaos below. Friday morning dawned with ideal flying weather and the promise of public humiliation. Patricia's demonstration looked like polished corporate theater, a white event tent, a ribbon-cutting setup, a champagne reception, and carefully placed camera angles for live news. She stood at a makeshift podium in a pristine designer white suit, microphone checked, facing about 40 people, investors from premium development partners, nervous county officials, and a swelling band of elderly protesters led by Margaret Thompson. The contrast was stark, her bought elegance against the real community she'd tried to wipe away. I arrived late on purpose, dressed in my most tattered farmer clothes, and parked my battered pickup squarely between the luxury cars, a visual statement that undercut everything she valued. Patricia noticed immediately, her irritation visible. She hated the reminder that she dismissed me as powerless trash and then invited me to witness her triumph. Her composure was brittle. She knew failure here meant total ruin, and she still hadn't figured out who exactly was forcing the issue. She launched in a pageantry that would have impressed any corporate event planner. Today we show that vision and determination beat bureaucratic obstruction, she proclaimed into the cameras. A small plane circled for the planned landing, providing the perfect live image to prove her point, or so she thought. News crews rolled as she pointed to the unauthorized runway, convinced that a successful landing would legitimize the entire venture. The irony was exquisite. She was celebrating at the exact moment her defeat was being staged. I stepped out of the crowd with the calm confidence of someone who'd handled national airspace crises for decades. Conversation halted as I approached the podium. You could feel the air change. Patricia tried to keep control with a veneer of politeness. "Mr. Anderson, this is hardly the time," she started. I cut in smoothly. "Mrs. Brown," I said, drawing a wallet case from my pocket and opening it for maximum visibility. The reveal landed like a thunderclap. I held up my credentials so every camera could see the Federal Aviation Administration seal and the title beneath it, Deputy Director. "I'm James Anderson, Deputy Director of the Federal Aviation Administration, I announced. The crowd reacted instantly. Audible gasps, investors stepping back, cameras zooming in on the badge. Patricia's face drained as the reality of exposure closed around her. The public spectacle was exactly the accountability moment we'd planned. FAA, she whispered, stunned. That can't be. Her corporate poise dissolved as the audience grasped the gravity of the violations. Investors waved contracts and demanded explanations, panic spreading through their ranks. The aviation consultant who'd lent superficial credibility to Patricia's plan was suddenly the wrong kind of authority, and I addressed the crowd with the full force of federal regulatory power. As Deputy Director of the Federal Aviation Administration, I told them I have jurisdiction over all aviation facilities and airspace operations. That aircraft you're planning to land is approaching an unauthorized strip in Class D controlled airspace near Tulsa International. Multiple safety violations with civil and criminal penalties. I pointed to the incoming plane as live evidence of the breach. Then I put my government phone on speaker and called Tulsa Tower. Everyone heard the call. Tulsa Tower, this is Deputy Director Anderson, FAA. An aircraft is approaching an unauthorized facility 15 miles southwest. Deny landing clearance. Vector the aircraft away pending compliance. The tower's immediate, formal reply confirmed my authority for all present. Roger, Deputy Director Anderson. All landing clearances denied pending regulatory compliance. The approaching plane turned away. The spectacle that was supposed to validate Patricia instead recorded her public undoing, a dramatic, irreversible moment of federal enforcement on film. The result of months of preparation and the flawless execution of federal justice against elder abuse and aviation safety crimes. I spoke to the crowd as cameras captured every word, ensuring both a permanent record and a future deterrent. For 3 months, Patricia Brown had treated me like worthless trash, convinced I was powerless, insulting me as dead weight, and trying to drive me out of her premium community through harassment and intimidation. I paused, letting her actions sink in for every witness before continuing. She bullied elderly neighbors living on fixed incomes, stole $45,000 for a sham aviation project, and constructed an unauthorized private runway inside federally controlled airspace with no permits. Another deliberate pause allowed the weight of her crimes to hit home. Too bad for you, Patricia, I said with quiet authority. I'm the Deputy Director of the Federal Aviation Administration, and you just built an illegal runway in my regulated airspace. The words carried not just my voice, but decades of federal aviation power, with the promise of full enforcement now unavoidable. The immediate response was swift and precise, showing the reality of the enforcement she had dismissed as red tape. The county sheriff stepped in, carrying an FAA notice of violation, an immediate closure order I had arranged through official channels. On live television, I tore down her ceremonial ribbon, turning her grand opening into a public shutdown. This facility is permanently closed under FAA authority, I declared. All operations terminated due to safety violations and regulatory noncompliance. The symbolism was undeniable. The fallout hit instantly. Patricia's investors surrounded her, demanding refunds and threatening lawsuits for fraud and false federal compliance claims. Reporters shoved microphones at her, while social media erupted with viral clips of federal power colliding with her arrogance. She was unraveling live, her credibility shattered beyond repair, while I calmly walked back to my old pickup truck. Margaret Thompson's vindication was complete. Cameras caught her triumphant reaction as justice finally punished the harassment local authorities had ignored. Elderly residents cheered, freed from Patricia's financial terrorism. Investors scrambled to calculate their losses, some already discussing criminal referrals. Multiple federal agencies now had open cases against her. Aviation, securities, elder protection, environmental, a storm of investigations closing in. The event had delivered perfect evidence for sweeping federal prosecution while ensuring Patricia's public humiliation became permanent. Did you see that twist coming? Drop your reactions. I want to know if you guessed the FAA reveal. Online, the fallout went nuclear. The reveal created the perfect viral cocktail. Vulnerable victims, a hidden federal official, and a David versus Goliath takedown. Patricia's stunned expression became meme fuel, a symbol of arrogance meeting its match. Within hours, millions had watched, shared, and commented. When you scam the FAA deputy director and Karen meets federal aviation law dominated hashtags worldwide. Her frozen look of disbelief was immortalized in endless edits, reaction videos, and parodies. Viewers loved the authenticity, true justice, publicly delivered with ironclad authority. The internet crowned it peak justice content, while creators milked the footage for reaction videos that pushed the story's reach even further. Financial collapse followed immediately. Premium development partners demanded repayment and threatened suit for securities fraud and false compliance guarantees. 18 families who had paid fees waived contracts, demanding refunds and compensation for harassment. Shouts of "You promised federal approval, and this is fraud," echoed around her. Patricia faced the impossible math of refunding money already wasted on construction and personal luxuries. Her world crumbled in days. News vans camped outside her house. Angry investors blocked her driveway. Calls brought non-stop threats of litigation. Her real estate license faced suspension. Her leased BMW was repossessed, and her country club froze her membership. Federal investigators froze her accounts while opening probes into money laundering and investor fraud. Meanwhile, the community celebrated. Vulnerable residents finally had victory, a true triumph over the predator who thought she could crush them with money and intimidation. Those elderly residents who'd been deliberately targeted by someone wielding money and institutional cover. Margaret Thompson's TV interview provided the perfect headline quote for reporters. At last, bullies face real federal consequences instead of hiding behind wealth and status. Her words carried the weight of someone who had successfully led community resistance against entrenched authority. Neighborhood social feeds lit up with victory posts celebrating the vindication of seniors once dismissed as weak obstacles to progress. Meanwhile, Patricia's personal collapse accelerated. Her shallow social network evaporated overnight, exposing how fragile relationships built on wealth and appearance truly were. Her husband filed for separation immediately. Her children changed online identities to escape the viral humiliation, and extended relatives stopped answering her calls. Even her closest friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be linked to someone now infamous for federal crimes and national scandal. The image of Patricia as a power player dissolved once the media revealed her real finances through investigation and regulatory files. Multiple agencies opened joint cases. The FAA announced a formal inquiry into unauthorized facility construction. The SEC launched an investigation into fraudulent investment solicitations and false compliance claims. Consumer protection units documented her harassment of seniors, and federal prosecutors weighed criminal charges for obstructing federal authority and knowingly endangering aviation safety. The combined outcome pointed toward prison time along with total financial ruin. Her fall was absolute. Patricia shut down her real estate office after her staff quit and clients abandoned her to avoid the stink of a federal criminal probe. Licensed professions were closed to her forever, as violations now lived in permanent public record. Foreclosure loomed as development partners sought to reclaim assets. She began apartment hunting while fending off endless reminders of her disgrace. The viral coverage guaranteed she could never outrun recognition or rebuild credibility anywhere in America. Revenge was complete, but the fallout kept piling on. What punishment do you think Patricia deserves? Drop your thoughts below. Locally, a permanent exhibit in the coffee shop became a symbolic shrine to justice. A photo of James Anderson at his work clothes hung beside a headline declaring, "Too bad, I'm the director." Visitors snapped pictures and shared stories of their own run-ins with corrupt authority figures. Patricia, now working retail for minimum wage, drove past the memorial daily, forced to confront a permanent reminder of her spectacular fall. The caption beneath the photo read, "Never judge by appearance. Character over cash." It became the community motto, a celebration of authenticity over false status. Transformation followed swiftly. Margaret Thompson won unanimous election as HOA president, replacing Patricia's toxic regime with protective bylaws shielding seniors and fixed-income families from financial bullying. Clear rules now ensured fair handling of concerns without intimidation or discrimination. Where Patricia's illegal runway had been plotted, neighbors planted a community garden with a sign reading, "All neighbors welcome. Dignity required." The space became a hub for connection instead of division. Patricia's exile was permanent, her professional and social rehabilitation impossible. Background checks exposed her viral notoriety, leading employers to reject her instantly. The internet's memory sealed her fate, every search result tied to federal crimes and harassment. Yet her downfall became an enduring lesson. Universities incorporated the case into business ethics curricula. Federal agencies used it in leadership and compliance training, and HOA organizations nationwide studied it as a governance cautionary tale. Patricia's campaign of harassment became the textbook example of housing discrimination, while my documentation strategy became a model for regulators navigating complex community disputes. One line of mine spread widely across leadership circles. Real federal authority isn't about flashing credentials. It's about having the patience to let bullies expose themselves fully before justice arrives. The phrase resonated as both tactical advice and moral principle, showing how true accountability protects the vulnerable not with shortcuts, but with comprehensive evidence and decisive enforcement. Digital archives preserved every detail of Patricia's downfall, her schemes, her federal violations, her public humiliation, ensuring her story would live on as a warning to anyone tempted to exploit the elderly or ignore aviation law. Documentary producers soon began developing a full examination of the saga, cementing her defeat as both entertainment and education for generations to come. The case became known nationwide as the airstrip that never was, a federal justice story, a title that ensured its lessons would live far beyond our small Oklahoma community. Each year, our neighborhood now celebrates Dignity Day, a permanent tradition born from victory over systematic harassment. It's more than a festival. It's a reminder that communities grow strong when built on mutual respect instead of intimidation. James Anderson, beamed in from Washington, spoke to the crowd gathered in the community garden planted on the very ground where Patricia once tried to build her illegal runway. He wore his same work clothes, deliberately choosing humility over prestige, reminding everyone that real authority serves people, it doesn't dominate them. The image that came to define our transformation was simple but powerful. James sitting on his farmhouse porch at sunset, the cornfields restored, his FAA deputy director badge resting quietly on the kitchen table beside a farmer's almanac. Two identities, public servant and humble farmer, balanced with equal dignity and purpose. The message resonated far beyond Oklahoma. Real federal power comes from service, not status. Character will always matter more than wealth or appearances. The strongest communities are those that protect their most vulnerable members. Patricia's cruelty became a permanent cautionary tale, while James's patience and restraint became a model for ethical leadership. What she thought would be her premium aviation community ended instead as a masterclass in why you should never judge by appearances. Patricia chose the wrong target. She harassed seniors on fixed incomes, believing they were powerless, only to discover that the quiet farmer in work clothes was also a deputy director of the Federal Aviation Administration, an official with the authority to end her schemes permanently. Her downfall made one truth crystal clear: aviation safety regulations are not suggestions. They are binding federal law that applies equally to everyone, wealthy HOA presidents included. The FAA doesn't just regulate airlines and major airports. It governs every inch of American airspace, including unauthorized private runways built by those who think the rules don't apply to them. Margaret Thompson and the elderly residents proved that Vulnerable does not mean helpless. Through documentation, persistence, and coordinated action, they built the case that triggered federal intervention, setting a precedent for communities across the nation. The legacy of our fight carries a simple lesson. Justice often comes from unexpected places, delivered by people who understand that true power serves